Hello, English language teachers, students. Welcome to the analysis of the poem Development, the poem written by Kundi Faraja. This poem is found in Sermons, Poetry Collection, poems by Tanzanian poets, the book coordinated by Richard S. Mabara and this book was published in 1980. Kundi Faraja is a Tanzanian poet who always writes for lower class people or citizens, defending the class of the underprivileged people in the society that we live. So this poem, Development, is a poem trying to criticize the nature of African leadership after independence, how bad leadership results into poor living condition and some sorts of disappointment. So this poem was written by Kundi Faraja to defend the class of poor people, the class of the majority who are disappointed by leaders who preach water while they are taking wine. That is to say, bad leadership has been the source of poor living condition and disappointment in Africa. Here the poem reads: A man of the people enters his office to sit on the throne of patterned state, his stick of power across the table. He looks into the files to see the demands of the millions of people who, for years since Uhuru, have just managed to survive. They ring out one message: Man of the people, you have always been telling us what we need: health centers, more schools, clean water, better transport facilities, better living conditions. Do you plead incapable to bring about development? I declare running better than walking for a young and poor country. I plead fighting under development, tougher than fighting a wounded buffalo with a pocket knife. I plead under development, stronger than the blows of the sea when the hurricane is at its height. I plead fighting under development, tougher than combating colonialism. I see that it is more difficult to maintain peace than to stop a coup d'etat. I plead the cry of the nation, more painful than the yell of a woman as her husband dies of sickness. It is more painful than the screams of a man dying in agony in the chorus of the greater python found in the African forest. How is development to be brought, brother, when the people to whom we have entrusted power are corrupt? I plead the stomachs of the privileged few, greater than the Rift Valley. They cannot be satisfied with a normal share. I plead the thirsts of the minority, greater than that of the Sahara. No rains can quench it. I reckon the minority more sensitive to egoism than to national development. Nothing that is not theirs is of any interest. Their response to egoism is faster than camera film to light, but as slow as tropisms to nation building. The majority pleads, exploited, cheated, disregarded. But brother, how is development to come? Listeners, this poem once again is an ironical remark to what is so-called leadership in African countries after independence. What was the nature of African leadership after independence? Remember, it has been a common agenda, a common issue, one of the most cross-cutting issues in African post-independent countries, whereby leaders who were entrusted with power, leaders who entered into power, turned to be the they tend to be the shadows of their former colonial, their former colonialists. They ended up perpetuating some elements of colonialism to the extent that they found themselves forgetting the majority people while putting forward selfish tendencies, and this created and still creates disappointment to innocent majority. So Kundi Faraja in this poem highly criticizes the nature of African leadership indulged by fake promises, and we find leaders who stand on platforms demanding for votes from the majority people, but what they are after, it is to win positions in the government. But what follows is quite a disappointment, because they do not fulfill what should be done, and this creates disappointment, and we find the issue of development being a very tough, a very difficult task to deal with, and this has resulted into poor living condition. Listeners, in stanza 1, the persona describes a man of the people who is probably the top leader of the political party who is in power, probably a president, and he is endowed with all kinds of mandates, and it is spoken in stanza 1. A man of the people enters his office to sit on the throne of patterned state. He is taking of power across the table. So that is an indication that the leader described in stanza 1 is of full mandate. Is he actually a man of the people? Remember, this poem has a taste of ironical appeal. Is he actually a man of the people? Is a corrupt leader a man of the people? So this is a provocative question raised by Kundi Faraja. Stanza 2. He looks into the files to see the demands of the millions of people. Remember, he has sat and he looks into the files to see the demands of the millions of people. Who are those people? People of the lower class. People who have been promised by this very political leader. Of the millions of the people who for years since Uhuru have just managed to survive. That is to say, to the majority people, Uhuru has no meaning, because some political promises have not been fulfilled. They are suffering eventually. They ring out one message, man of the people. Here goes the message rung by the majority to a man of the people. Man of the people, you have always been telling us what we need. Health centers, more schools, clean water, better transport facilities, better living conditions. So in stanza 2, it is an indicator that a man of the people has not fulfilled any of what he used to promise in the past. Rather, he is in power, misusing the government fund for selfish or egoistic tendencies. And you get a theme of bad leadership or irresponsiveness of leaders, or irresponsibility of leaders, because a leader in stanza 2 does not fulfill what he promised. Health centers are not there, more schools, clean water, better transport facilities, better living conditions, all are not there, and this has resulted into disappointment. The next stanza, do you plead incapable to bring about development? So here goes a lament Here goes the exposition of incapability of this particular leader. He is incapable of bringing about development. This has resulted into disappointment. I declare running better than walking for a young and poor country. I played fighting and development tougher than fighting a wounded buffalo. Yeah, a wounded buffalo with a pocket knife. So the man of the people declares running better than walking. He wishes to see development for a young and poor country, but to him it is so tough to fight against the development. The next stanza. I played under development stronger than the blows of the sea. When the hurricane is at its height, I played fighting under development tougher than combating colonialism. I see that it is more difficult to maintain peace than to stop a coup d'etat. So here goes indicators of disappointment as far as fighting and development is concerned. And it gives us a flavor of bad leadership in Africa, because leaders fail to fight against underdevelopment. They put forward selfish tendencies and egoistic tendencies while the majority of people are suffering. The next stanza. I plead the cry of the nation more painful than the yell of a woman as her husband dies of sickness. It is more painful than the scream of a man dying in agony in the chorus of the greater python found in the African forest. That is to say, the majority people in this particular country are experiencing some sorts of suffering, severe suffering, and this has resulted into disappointment. But remember, a leader is watching, and there is no way he can do regarding fighting the situation. How is development to be brought to brother when the people to whom we have entrusted power are corrupt? This stanza carries a theme of corruption, and if leaders are corrupt, then development will remain a nightmare. It is impossible to bring about development when the people to whom we have entrusted power are corrupt. I plead the stomachs of the privileged few greater than the Rift Valley. They cannot be satisfied with the normal share. It is an indicator of African leadership, leaders who cannot be satisfied with what they actually get. Rather, they keep on feeding their own stomachs, while the majority citizens are suffering. I plead the thirst of the minority greater than that of the Sahara. No rains can quench it. To mean the minority put forward, few people who are in power put forward selfish tendencies while the majority are suffering. I reckon the minority more sensitive to egoism than to national development. Nothing that is not theirs is of any interest. This stanza presents a theme of selfishness of leaders who do not think of other people's welfare, rather they consider their own welfares. Their response to egoism is faster than camera film to light, but as slow as tropisms to nation building. They are more sensitive to egoism, to selfishness, than to nation building. So this is a theme of selfishness and irresponsibility. The last stanza. The majority played, exploited, cheated, disregarded, but brother, how is the development to come? The majority played, exploited. The stanza gives a theme of exploitation because the majority are exploited by leaders who are in power. The majority are cheated. Remember, leaders endowed with a theme of lies and deceit because they do not fulfill what they actually promise. They are disregarded. They are not actually regarded in the agenda of nation building and development. But brother, how is the development to come? That is a rhetorical question, or that gives us the general understanding of how difficult is to bring about development because the majority of people are corrupt. Guiding questions. Number 1. The poem is all about development in the developing countries. That is to say, according to the poet's perception, wherever there is corruption, exploitation, oppression, and selfishness, there won't be development. And it is revealed in the last stanza. The majority prayed, exploited, cheated, disregarded. But brother, how is the development to come? Is the persona happy in this song? Is the persona happy in this poem? The persona is actually unhappy. Why? It is because he seems to complain about the behavior of leaders who are corrupt, selfish, irresponsible, leaders who do not think about the majority people's welfare. Such leaders lead to the countries to remain underdeveloped. What does the term egoism mean in this poem? Listeners, the term egoism refers to selfishness, thinking of one's own interests or needs without thinking about others. It also means to not sharing what one has with others. That has specifically been used to refer to African leaders who seem to be egoistic and they forget the majority welfare. Trace the verses which trace the possible themes. What are some possible verses in this poem actually that reveal some possible themes? Well, the last stanza, the majority played, exploited, cheated, disregarded, but brother, how is the development to come? You get a theme of exploitation, a theme of irresponsibility of readers, and the like. Some verses like, the people to whom we have entrusted power are corrupt, get a theme of corruption. I reckon the minority more sensitive to egoism. These verses carry a theme of selfishness. The majority preyed, exploited. This depicts the theme of exploitation. Possible themes found in this poem, one being among them is selfishness, as how we have found leaders represented by a man of the people seem to be selfish by not considering the majority welfare, and they feed on their own stomachs, and this has been the source of underdevelopment. Corruption is another theme. Readers portrayed in this poem seem to be corrupt, and according to the poet, it is difficult to fight underdevelopment where readers are corrupt. So readers should stop corruption in case they wish to ensure development. And another possible theme is classes. In the society, we have two classes: the class of the minority or of leaders who are in power, who are identified through their selfish tendencies, corruption, exploitation. On the other hand, we have the class of the lower class, the class of people who have nothing, and they face or encounter exploitation done by the upper class, and they are the ones who are reminding the man of the people for him to go back to what he used to promise. They are suffering from poor living condition and the disappointment of all some sorts. Exploitation is another theme, as we find leaders who are not satisfied with what they have. They are actually misusing the material wealth or the national resources for selfish tendencies. Poor social services is another theme, as it has been revealed since Uhuru. Social services are poor. The majority are demanding for health centers, schools, clean water, better transport facilities, and better living conditions. But remember, they have not been supplied to them. What is the possible message that someone can learn? Well, wherever there is egoism, corruption, exploitation, poor leadership, then it is too difficult to develop. So we should fight against such evils in case we wish to upgrade our uh, economic and social welfare. What type of this poem? This poem is modern due to variation in the number of verses across its stanzas. Remember, the number of syllables vary according to verses, so it is modern of its kind. Although it has some elements of narrative, because the poem seems to narrate more about what is happening in the mind of the people's society. Well, structure. The poem has 12 stanzas. The first stanza has 6 verses. The second stanza has 14 verses. The third one has 2 verses. The fourth stanza has 10 verses, while the fifth stanza has 5 verses. The sixth one has 10 verses. The seventh one has 5 verses. The eighth one has 5 verses. The ninth one has 4 verses. The 10th one has 5 verses, but the 11th stanza has 4 verses, and the 12th stanza has 6 verses. Language use. The language used in this poem is simple, ordinary, and well understood to readers, and some words have been used to convey some possible themes. Words like played, and development, and a man of the people. Some words like minority can give out a theme of exploitation, majority can give a theme of poor living condition, and so on. Figures of speech have also been used and part of language used to convey the message across. The poet has made the use of barbarism by the use of the Kiswahili word, the second stanza, uhuru, to mean freedom. Exaggeration has also been used in this poem when the persona says the stomachs of the privileged few greater than the Rift Valley. Likewise, the thirst of the minority greater than that of the Sahara. Personification has also been used, whereby inanimates have been given human qualities. For example, I declare running better than walking for a young and poor country. It is not obvious, it is not possible to find countries running and walking. Well, what is the tone or the voice of this poem? The tone seems to be ironic, mocking the nature of leadership in this poem, sympathetic to the majority citizens who are suffering, and satirical, when the poet tries to criticize the nature of bad leadership in this society. Mood. The mood of this poem is ironic, serious, and angry as well, when trying to talk about exploitation, selfishness, and corruption. Rhyme. What is the rhyme scheme of this poem? Rhyme scheme seems to be irregular. It is because there is variation in number of syllables across each verse, but also there is variation in the sound. There is no similarity in sound at the end of verses, so this is an indicator that the poem is modern. Relevance. Is this poem relevant to what is happening today? Well, this poem is quite relevant to all developing countries like Tanzania and other African countries where corruption is rampant, where corruption is common. But remember, this poem was written at the moment when Tanzania was facing corruption. In the years 1980s, Tanzania was facing corruption, and that resulted into poor living condition. And corruption was one of the burning issues that, in one way or another, writers could write to address the issue, so as to direct the search on how to fight against the corruption of leaders and development. Thank you very much for your attention. See you and meet you in the next analysis of another poetic work or artistic work. Thank you.